Welcome everyone to Europe 1973. A little summer vacation that Richard and David Brewer took to Europe 50 years ago in 1973. 1973 was the most significant year of the 20th century, according to a British newspaper, The Independent. Let me repeat that. A British newspaper declared 1973 to be the most significant year of the 20th century. It certainly was a significant year for me personally. That trip to Europe started on June 11th and went to August 31st. Now, more episodes will be posted during the summer of 2023 to cover Europe 1973. Along the way, you'll see Iceland, Luxembourg, England and Wales, France, Spain, Italy, Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. And as we move along the timeline of Europe 1973, we'll drop in some anecdotes about what's going on back in the States and on the world stage. Our first stop is Iceland, our family's roots, where we encounter a live volcano. Be sure and subscribe. It's going to be fun. Richard and David Brewer. In 1973, Richard was 30 and David was 25. These shots progress from about 1960 to 1970. Richard was in the food service industry in 1973. He was an elegant dresser and an accomplished skier. He lived in Lake Placid, New York, and loved winter sports of all kinds. In 1973, I was working for an engineering firm in Flushing, Michigan, and I lived in Flint. You've heard of Flint. In 1973, Flint was at its peak of population as a General Motors boomtown. How things change. I still like to fish, especially freshwater fishing in the Great Lakes. Our little summer vacation, I call it Europe 1973, started in Lake Placid, New York on June 11th. We got a ride to JFK Airport and flew to Iceland, landing there in the early morning hours of June 12th. Our mom was FBI, full-blooded Icelandic, so we had the privilege of meeting family in Iceland and getting the royal treatment. We were the guests of this family. On the right is my mother's cousin, Margaret Indriðadóttir, a journalist who was head of the news for the Icelandic radio network for many years. Her husband, Tor, along with their sons Ornolfur and Andri. Ornolfur later became the Secretary General at the office of the President of Iceland. Andri became a teacher and writer and served as a member of Parliament for several years. Tor Williamson, who we will hear from later in this episode, was one of Iceland's leading men of letters, a prize-winning novelist. He served the Icelandic artist community over his lifetime. He was an influencer in Iceland's cultural life. Here's a shot inside Margaret's house in Reykjavik. I have the most vivid memories of the breakfast that Margaret served us. A pour-over coffee using a cone filter, strong Icelandic coffee, for a hard roll and a pat of butter. A truly amazing Icelandic breakfast. Here we are at the home of Jóhann Indriðason, who is Margaret's brother. From the left, we have Jóhann, who is an engineer, and his daughter Helga. Then that's me, next at the back. In the front is Jóhann's daughter Sylvia. Then on the sofa are Margaret, who you already met, Helga, Jóhann's wife, and finally Olafur. He likes to be called Ollie, who is a pilot and is also brother to Margaret and Jóhann. Ollie was our pilot, and on June 14th he flew us to the Westman Islands. Here Margaret is showing us the city of Reykjavik on the evening of June 12th. Margaret had one of those two-cycle Saabs. You mix gasoline and motor oil in those things. I haven't seen one of those since. The first view here is of the waterfront, looking across the water to a mountain range. The next views here feature the great church in Reykjavik, the Hallgrímskirkja, which is a parish church and a national landmark. Here are other views of the church, these not taken on our trip. The structure dominates the city skyline. The word kirk means church, so it is Hallgrím's church. The next view shows in the foreground the typical house construction in Reykjavik with the use of concrete. In this view, if you look carefully, you can see the Laugardalsholl, an arena with its curved roofline. Everything from rock concerts to chess matches take place here. And here's a couple of better shots, not from our trip. This arena was the site of the 1972 World Championship chess match. Bobby Fischer from Brooklyn, New York, became the world chess champion by defeating defending champion Boris Spassky of the USSR. The match was mired in political overtones of the Cold War, and Bobby Fischer was eccentric to say the least. This chess match remains the most famous World Chess Championship ever. There's a good film about the match referenced in the description below. This spoon commemorates the chess match. I purchased this spoon in Reykjavik in 2009. Asmundur Svensson was an artist who had a museum in Reykjavik with an outdoor garden displaying the sculptures, as you see here. Here in another place I see a sculpture, so perhaps Margaret took us to Svensson's house that night as well. Here are shots of the waterfront at about midnight. It's June 12th, so the sun will dip below the horizon and then rise shortly thereafter. It really never gets truly dark at this time of the year in Iceland. On June 13th, Margaret took us out driving near Reykjavik. We can see in these views the spare surface of some of the Icelandic landscape. It's really true that the American astronauts went to Iceland to train for walking on the moon. The incredible variety of the landforms, waterfalls, beaches, glaciers, landscapes, lava flows, and hot pots make Iceland an incredible attraction for all visitors from all over the world. You should put Iceland on your bucket list. An inexpensive way to see some of the amazing landscape of Iceland is in recent films that have been made there. Check the description below for a film I love with beautiful shots in Iceland. The next day, June 14. On January 23, 1973, a new volcano split the ground apart, and the volcanic cone rose to over 700 feet on Heimaey, the largest of the Westman Islands. The Westmans are about 6 miles off the southern coast of Iceland. The eruption opened a mile-long gash on the east side of Vestmannaeyjar, a quiet fishing town and Iceland's most important fishing port. Over the next weeks and months, an epic battle against nature ensued, and Vestmannaeyjar became the town that would not die. Ali is our pilot today to fly us to the Westman Islands for the day, along with a few scientists, journalists, and technicians. The volcano, dubbed Kirkjufell, or Church Mountain, spewed out enormous volumes of tephra, or ash, and molten lava that created a cone just north of Helgafell, or Holy Mountain, the remnant of an earlier volcano estimated to have erupted 5,000 years before, forming the island itself. As we approached the volcano from the air, we could see the plume of ash rising in periodic bursts. And when we were on the ground, we could hear loud groaning noises as the subterranean pressure released its energy and sent the ash upward. Ash rained down on us in intermittent showers all day. Black ash accumulated to a depth of up to 17 feet within the village. Homes and possessions burned as molten rockets of lava were thrown onto roofs. The north face of the new cone sloped directly toward the neck of the harbor, only roughly 500 feet wide. When lava began to course down the cone, it started to fill the harbor. The lava flow, if it continued, could close the harbor forever. A plan was made to pump seawater onto the north face of the lava flow in the hope that a navigable harbor could be preserved. An epic battle for the island was underway. Most of the 5,300 inhabitants of the island were evacuated safely to the mainland within 6 hours of the eruption, leaving only a handful of emergency technicians and officials remaining behind. On June 14th, we were the only tourists. There was a bit of activity going on while we were there. Heavy equipment was shaping an area of land to build new homes, and water was being pumped onto the face of the lava flow. Much of the lava flow had cooled enough by June 14 that we could walk on it. Power cables, water pipes, and observation equipment were visible on the surface where we walked. One observation point was a simple pipe into the surface. When you looked down the hole, you could see glowing red magma below. It was amazing. We even walked up to the lip of the volcano. When the battle to save the port was over, outsiders who had observed the epic struggle between the Icelandic people and the forces of nature were very impressed by the stoic calm, resilience, and strength of the Icelanders. One of the journalists asked Tor Williamson, who you met earlier, about the nature of the Icelandic people and how they came to possess such heroic qualities. Williamson, like many people from all walks of life in Iceland, had come to the Westmans to help salvage goods and clean up the ash. Tor was in the generation of artists who were modernists, who thought that less importance should be given to Iceland's ancient literature. Later, however, Williamson's worldview began to shift to make peace between the old myths, folktales, and saga motifs, and the cloven nature of man and man's struggle with himself. Williamson's response to the question about the heroic qualities of the Icelandic people was, and I quote, "The Vikings who settled Iceland were lucky to have captured Irish princesses and bring them to Iceland. The Irish gave Icelanders a poetic quality that they might not have had otherwise." Close quote. I just think that is the coolest response ever. You Irish princesses out there, you know who you are. Thank you for your gift to the Icelandic people. We flew back to Reykjavik that same day. When I slipped into the bathtub back at Margaret's house, the water turned gray. I was covered with ash. An amazing day. Oh, and by the way, while we were there on the lava flows of the Westman Islands, back in the USA, on June 14th, President Nixon reimposed a temporary price freeze. In 1971, Nixon had frozen wages and prices, cut the dollar loose from the gold standard, and imposed surcharges on imports. The so-called Nixon shock of 1971 had an aftershock in 1973. 1973 was a most significant year. The next day, June 15, we took a tour of two of the amazing natural wonders of southeast Iceland, Geyser and Gullfoss, with Margaret's brother Johan as our guide. Geyser is a water spout, not unlike our Old Faithful. These rare hydrogeological phenomena exist in only a few places on Earth. Gullfoss, meaning Golden Falls, is a significant waterfall that has its source in a glacier field. The water in the falls has a golden tint to it that is a result of environmental dust that accumulates in the glacial column. What makes these sites remarkable to us from America is that there is no commercialization, no signs, safety rails, concessions, or admission fees. Just nature. I've been to these sites twice in my lifetime, 1973 and again in 2009, and I never saw another human being outside of our own party. Here we look downstream at Gulfus to see the spray and the radical cut in the Earth's surface. And finally, here I am with Johan at the Golden Falls. On June 16th, we saw our cousin George Rich, his wife Claudia, and son Eric. George is my Aunt Margaret's son. He was an anthropologist and lived in Reykjavik in 1973. Richard and I took another trip to Iceland with our families in 2009. Here we see Johan, Ali, Helga, and Ali's wife Hannah, and here me with Ali in 2009. I really hope you enjoyed that dip into the Icelandic culture and Iceland itself. Europe 1973 will continue with episode 2 posting around June 30th. In episode 2, Richard and I get on our motorcycles and we encounter a struggle where we need those stoic, strong, and resilient qualities of Icelanders. As I said at the top of this video, 1973 was an incredibly significant year for me personally. The two most important relationships in my life began in 1973. In February, I became a Christian, and my relationship with Jesus Christ was just a green shoot in the summer of '73. Then in September, I met Kathy Barrow, who became my wife in July of 1974. I'm happy to report that both relationships are still with me, still vibrant, incredibly important for me personally, and growing. In closing, let me mention that my brother Richard passed away January 12th, 2022. I miss him, and I wish he was here with me to help me get things right. Come and join the ride, subscribe, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.